more or less 10 o'clock, a little bit less, more. It's past 10, so is that more or less? I think it's more, yeah. I would say it's more. Or 10 on Wednesday, and it's time for relaxing painting with Dice and Dungeons, but there will very likely be no painting today. We'll see how things go. Yep, definitely needing coffee today. Definitely in need of that. It's not that I didn't sleep well last night. It's just sometimes it's just hard to get going in the mornings when get up and go is a little bit less than young. So what you see here is the thing I'm going to be starting to work on today. As it says, it's the 1965 Indianapolis 500 winner, kind of, sort of, because this particular model, they're very proud of this. Those famous Fords. There's a whole series of these. There's a GT40 and a Mark IV that won Le Mans, I think, the 24 hours race. This one is supposed to be the one that Jim Clark drove to win the 1965 Indianapolis 500. This was a real big breakthrough because the engine's in the back, like Formula One cars, as opposed to the roadsters that were the standard racers for decades in oval racing, open wheel, open cockpit oval racing in the U.S. for decades. Now, as I'm working on this, I'll reminisce. I'll do some reminiscing about automobile racing in the 1950s and 60s. But this was a huge breakthrough. Well, not this exactly, but the one that this is supposed to be was a huge breakthrough in that it brought over the technology from Formula One at the time into oval racing in the U.S. Certain people had been arguing, encouraging that to happen for quite a while. And then Team Lotus, which made the chassis for this, in 1964 actually brought over one along with their star driver, Jim Clark, in 1964, and it went pretty well, but the tires failed on Jim Clark's car. It was just a tire failure, probably because the tires weren't made for this kind of car. And he crashed out of the race, and then because of that, they withdrew the other car. But then the next year, in 1965, there was an updated version of it, powered by it was real exciting, it was a Ford V8 engine that they put into it. They adapted the chassis for a U.S. spec engine, and it won the race. Jim Clark won it, and it was a huge breakthrough. I actually saw the 1964 car and the 1965 car because I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the mile-long track there, the race after the Indianapolis 500, the very next race was in Milwaukee always at that time. And so in 1964, the rear engine car came there and performed well. And then in 65, this one came, and the two of them just totally dominated. They set track records and dominated the race. And that changed how racing was done forever. Everybody then went to rear engine cars, and all sorts of bizarre kinds of combinations were created. This is sort of the 1965 winner, but the model itself is, as far as I can tell, almost certainly of the 1964 car. It's just been renumbered. I talked about that a lot the last couple of streams and complained about it. and whined about it and said, how could they do that? And what were they thinking when they did this? But it is what it is. So, yeah. So I built the original of this model. This is actually a reissue from the 1970s, like 1976 or something, of the original model, which came out after the 1965 race. And that was so exciting that I got one of the models and I actually built it. Not very well, okay, because I was 13 or 14 years old at the time. It looked like a car, but the steering didn't work and there was glue splattered all over the place because of the kind of cement that we had to use back then. And I didn't paint it, and so it didn't look nice and shiny like this on the cover does, because this was, painted. But yeah, so part of the reason I bought this back when it was less expensive, these are views of the already built model. I bought it for reasons of nostalgia, really. And then when I was thinking about what to build after the Savoia, in addition to finishing the Apollo, which I need to do one of these decades, it was kind of either this or a model of the bridge of the original series Star Trek. And I said, well, let's just build this. Let's build a small one. And then after this, which I will finish eventually, it's going to take a while because I have to do a lot of modifications to it, including getting rid of all the chrome, because there was no chrome on the car. There was steel and aluminum, as you can see if you look up images of the real car online. The next thing I think I'm going to tackle, I'm not entirely sure, but I think I'm going to tackle a plank-built model of the yacht America that won the first America's Cup before it was called America's Cup. Yeah, so a little bit later in the stream today, I have to do a couple of things first. A little bit later in the stream today, I'm going to destroy the collector value of this kit. There's one on eBay for $85. I mentioned that on Monday. Yeah, it's $85 in the original shrink wrap, just like this. Although the original price was $377, and then it went on sale for $10, and now it's listed on eBay for $85. So once I destroy the shrink wrap and open the box, and before I start building it, I will have destroyed significant collector value. So if there's any collectors out there who really, really want one and want me to stop and sell it to you before it's too late, you best let me know sometime in the next 15, 20 minutes or so. But before I open this and start working on it, I have some Porco Rosso stuff to finish. I finished painting the Porco Rosso minifig. I've got a stand, which I sanded. Okay. It's sanded so that it looks like a beach, because this Porco Rosso Savoia S21 is a seaplane, doesn't come up on land, and so this guy is going to be attached there somehow. And then the decal, the Porco Rosso decal, is going to go there. And then this will be done. This will be completed, and I will put it in the box with the Savoia S21, and I'll be showing that to everybody and then sticking it on a shelf somewhere forever. So this is going to go there. That's why there's no sand on that particular spot. I need to cut that out. I'm not prepared. I need to find some scissors. These are cheap little scissors. They might work. They should work. All I need to do is cut this out without cutting into it. That should be a fairly simple and straightforward task, right? One would think that. Yeah, I went silent. I can't even just there. Make sure I've cleaned off enough of this so that the decal will actually fit. It's not going to work very well on top of sand. So make sure that it's clear. Should take a little bit of sandpaper. Oh, it's way over there. Okay. Huh. Way over there. Just a tiny bit of sandpaper and clean this off. Yeah, good enough. Right. So decal time. Decals have to soak in water. And I'm going to need a little bit of a paper towel. Some of this to wick up some of the water. We learned the lesson last time. There it is. There's this little thing here. It's like a sort of like a tweezers, except it's spring loaded, so it clamps and then you open it and then it clamps again. I did this with some of the other decals. I finally figured it out because the decal was kind of just floating around. Down at the bottom, I had a hard time retrieving it. There. I don't know why the it was there. This belongs in a different box altogether, which isn't here anymore. And I need to moisten this surface. It needs to have water on it so that the decal can flow onto it. A decal. This should be a really simple thing to do, but it turns out usually it's not that simple for some reason. When I was little, when I was when I was younger, when I was young, and I put decals on planes. That was always the last thing. You build a plane, just slap it together, right? Didn't paint anything, slid the decals on. It seemed like it was a really easy thing to do, but now it seems harder. Suppose I could move the camera down a little bit. The director and camera operators on this stream they're really not very good. Frequently I'm off camera. It sometimes makes sense that it would be zooming in like this. Sometimes it's in the way, sometimes it's not even in focus. If my camera and director were other than me, I'd do something about it. These take a surprisingly long time to separate from the paper. I remember them taking so long when I was a preteen and built models and put the decals on. but it's taking a while. And then sometimes it sits too long, and then it separates, and then the decal separates from the paper while it's in the water and is just floating all over the place and threatening to tear or bend. Point it's supposed to just slide off. That. Except there we go. It sticks to your finger and not to the plastic. It's actually that's not a bad location. It looks okay. Maybe up a little higher. Yeah, Porco Rosso. It looks pretty even. Yeah, pretty even. Now I need to decide how to attach this. I need to. I'm thinking of actually rubber cement, or I have some contact cement that work. It has to be kind of goopy because it's on a rough surface, and I don't want to mess around if I don't have to. Give this a try. This is very thick. Okay, you can see it's very thick, which is just actually what I want right now. I want it to be kind of thick because it needs to get into the sand. Yeah, it's just oozing all over the place and making a mess. Yay. Okay. This is not how it's supposed to work. Okay, it's supposed to be on both surfaces, but I'm going to do it. Make sure I don't have it on my fingers. Get contact cement all over the model now that it's done, right? That would be bad. So I'm going to locate where I want this. He's slightly turned there. Yeah, it didn't work. I need to put some on here. Sticking to where I want it to stick. Okay, so that's not working. Let me try the other contact cement and see if that'll work. I have some impressions now on the stand where the feet are going to go, so maybe I can. I thought this would take about 1 minute. Hey, hi, Alan. Thanks for joining in again. Yeah, I'm trying to get Porco Rosso to adhere to the sandy beach that I created for him. And I thought it would take like 2 seconds. And that's exaggeration. I thought it would just be incredibly quick, right? But it's not being that way. It's taking it. My first attempt failed. Trying this other stuff instead. Contact cement, so it just sits there for a while, and then the two surfaces should contact each other, and they should adhere. That is how it is supposed to work. So the sitting for a while is pretty easy. Yep, permanently it's going to be. Yep, after this is done, after Porco is attached, I'm going to show the entire thing, the model, the Savoia S21, because that's been completed, and I'm going to put in the box with it, and then it'll be done. It'll be in a box over there somewhere, out of the way. Kind of like once these things are finished, then it's over. It's just in a box, and things go on. But I got the decal on now. It says Porco Rosso. It looks funny. This It's okay. Oh, I'm cleaning up while I'm waiting for the contact cement to be ready to be contacted. I am boxing up the remnants of the Savoia. Oh, I meant to do that. Now I remember, right? I remember this whole thing in Japanese has a story about the Savoia S21, and I never translated it. So I was going to put this away, but I don't want to put it away because I want to read it. So this is all the leftover bits of plastic and the decals I didn't use and the paint chart and the box. Sometimes these boxes are actually worth something. Seriously, I look on eBay and they'll say, model kit box only. Really? Somebody will pay to have the box. Weird, but it's true. Well, let's see if this sticks. No, not really. I mean, kind of. I'm going to let it sit there for a bit and see what happens. I'm not sure what else I can do. I mean, there is rubber cement. I could do that. No, I'll see if it sticks in a little bit. And then get the water out of the way. No, I'm going to get the trash out of the way. Be right back. Back. Just throwing things away because that was stuff that could have been a problem. Let me zoom down on their camera. There's great camera work today. It's Porco Rosso. Standing on the beach. Not to scale with his plane. Not to scale with the plane. The plane is too big. Okay, but after I see if that sticks, I will either re-adhere it with something else or put it in the box with the Savoia. So I did decide that I'm going to go ahead and build this model, as historically inaccurate as it is, and no matter how much it might be worth on eBay, if anybody's ever really going to be paying that much for it, because it's a nostalgia thing for me. So building the model is kind of a nostalgia thing, but it also reminds me of, the times I spent watching races in Milwaukee at the Milwaukee Mile. One of the most historic tracks in the country, by the way. Seriously, it is. And I saw this car. Well, not this car. This is tiny. I saw the car this is supposed to represent race in Milwaukee after it won the Indianapolis 500, and it won. Oh, you did? The same reason, right? Okay, I am now about to destroy the collector value. Here it is. I am destroying the collector value of this kit by cutting open the cellophane. I bought a whole bunch of models. Oh yeah, back on the PS2. Oh, that's right. Steam does those. They make remakes of things. Because I remember, Monkey Island, for example, and then buying it and replaying it. People actually just collect sealed kits like this. It's a collector thing. I bought a whole bunch of models, not because I wanted to collect them, although that's what it's turned into, is this collection of things that I won't get around to building. I bought a whole lot of those because, I thought I needed something to do when I retired. And I found other things to do other than building models. But for the purposes of the stream, here. Now I'm going to open the box. Maybe. It doesn't even lift up. This is a weird box. I'm going to get rid of this trash. I just threw away $40 worth of cellophane. And the box, what before the interior does? Sometimes the boxes are actually worth something. It doesn't. Usually the boxes lift up, but this one opens from the end. Oh, good. There's a part. I'm going to move the camera up a little bit. Here are parts that are falling off. This is really inconvenient. Okay, I'm going to have to get another box for this because I can't use this box. I'll be right back. Big collection of these kind of nice boxes. Like, no, this isn't going to work either. This isn't an ad for Om chocolate, but it's a really nice box, and I'm going to transfer all of these pieces since they're falling off the sprue, and I'm going to end up losing some of them. I'm going to try to just dump them into this box instead. There. I've got another box. Okay, all the green parts, most of the green parts have fallen off of the sprue. In fact, all but two of them. Hopefully aren't messed up. So it's molded in British racing green, or at least it supposedly is, but it's really not. Look at the surface texture of that. It's all messed up. I'm gonna have to like sand that down, and then I'm going to paint it. I'll get British racing green paint. Let's see, here's some tires. That's good. I don't know what that's supposed to be. Tires have lumps on them. I don't know why. And then there's look at these, all these chromed parts, including the driver. The driver. Look at it's a chromed. The dash, wow, they really, really went overboard. Way insanely overboard with chromed plastic parts. And nothing on the real car was chromed. So essentially, all of this is going to have to be sanded down and primed and repainted much more authentically, which is kind of a shame. But the chrome plating really messes up the parts. Okay, so there's springs. Okay, yeah, there's two different sizes. I'll talk about that later on, about why these are the springs for the rear suspension, why they're different, because the suspension is asymmetric. I didn't remember this from the originally, but this here is the driver, and the driver is chrome plated. Just amazing. This model is really bizarre. Well, let's see. I got a special offer. Huh. What does a special offer? Let's explore this together. I can buy paint. Well, look at those brushes. That's really terrible. Non-sniffable plastic cement in tubes and bottles. Hmm. You could buy a drop cloth. There's a Hoppy drop cloth protecting everybody from spills and accidents. I doubt that. A storehouse of, oh my. There's precision gluing tips. It's probably like, don't get glue on your fingers. That's a tip. Unique hobby sandpaper. Wow. All sorts of accessories one could buy back in the day. In 1979, it's copyrighted in 1979. I bet you can't buy this stuff anymore. It was a finishing kit. All the materials and tools needed to set up your hobby workbench. A hobby drop cloth, knife, sandpaper, gluing tips, plastic cement, contour putty. Could use that. I actually ordered some that was supposed to have arrived on April 15th, and I don't know where it is. And your choice of the most popular gloss or flat enamel paints. Look at all that. You could get the kits. What's on the other side? Gas-powered. Oh, well, cool. I didn't know that they made, these must be control line models. They had little gas engines in them. Not really gas, it was ethanol. Control line flights. That's interesting. Well, that was a special offer. Special. And these are the decals. Yeah, these decals are interesting. They're absolutely wrong. Okay, this is for the back, this is for the front. They've got the number 82 on them, all right. But this thing that says Lotus powered by Ford, that was on the 1964 car and not on the 1965 car. And these decals here were the sponsors for the 1964 car and not really the 65 car. Let's see what the instructions say. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, what they're doing is they're featuring the 1964 car. This is it, not the 1965 car. It was number 92, not number 82. And that's what this model is. It's the wrong model. It's just hilarious that they got away with it. Well, this is good. Be sure to let cement dry thoroughly. Take your time. Each step is a delicate operation. I'll have to remember that. I'll have to remember that it's delicate when I get around to it. Apply cement carefully. Be careful not to allow cement to touch moving parts. There are actually supposedly moving parts on this. The steering is supposed to work somehow. You turn the wheel. It's supposed to, yeah, that's what that long thing is. It's supposed to turn the front wheels. read through the entire instructions before starting. If you want to paint your model, paint them before assembly. Use enamel paint only, not lacquer. I don't know why. Paint small details as you proceed. Use of a tack rag is recommended to clean it off. Yep. Yeah, you're supposed to wash everything beforehand. Supposed to complete the painting before the body assembling, but then the seams show. So that's because the way the old model cement worked, it welded the plastic together, and if there was any paint in the way, it didn't hold. Okay, well, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge. So yes, as I suspected, this is in fact the 1964 car, not the 1965 car. It was just rebadged with the 1965 decal number, the number 82. Otherwise, it's this one, not the real. Wonder if Porco Rosso is adhering. Yeah, kind of. Good enough anyway. So I'm going to read this out loud because the way people wrote in 1960s is really kind of interesting. It's kind of fun. Just a lot of hyperbole. A lot of hyperbole in the writing. So let me just show off the Savoia S21 because it is a completed model. I have two completed models now, the Submarine and the Savoia, and one mostly but not quite finished model, the Apollo Stack. But it's the Savoia S21. This actually came out pretty well. I'm keeping the top fuselage separate from the inside because the inside you can see is highly detailed. Okay, the model fuselage is designed to lift off the bottom of the fuselage to reveal the interior detail of the plane, including the instrument panel. I wish I could show that to you easily because I did a good job with the here. I'll lift it up. Do this. Oh, my camera guy is really not working very well here. Yeah, look. Got the instrument panel down. I nailed that pretty well, I think. Porco Rosso is sitting there. This Porco Rosso, unlike the other Porco Rosso, is to scale. Here's a fuel tank. The Savoia this is really kind of, great. I'm sure it was actually designed this way. So this is a wooden plane. It's almost all made out of wood except for the engine housing and, certain places like brackets that hold things on. And Porco Rosso sits in a wooden cage. The cockpit is a wooden cage. And you can see it's open in the front, right? This is the fuel tank. So and it's got machine guns. So this is designed to shoot at each other, right? And so you're in a wooden airplane in the cockpit with no firewall between you and the fuel tank. Just, yeah, I really want to be doing that. So that's the plane, and then the fuselage came out. I think the whole thing came out really pretty well. These covers come off of the top of the engine, so you can see the detail of the engine underneath. I'm not going to take that off right now. But what I'm going to do is, this is the display model. You can see Porco Rosso is bigger here, but he's designed to just, yeah, I mean, it's like a death trap. I'm going to stick Porco Rosso here in the box. He wiggles a little bit. It's like a Weeble. It wobbles, but it doesn't fall off. At least it didn't yet. And yeah, it's done. There it is. The plane is complete. And it looks okay. It came out okay. I did it. I got detail pretty well. I got the spray painting on it pretty well. Got that done. Porco Rosso looks okay. And I'm going to now close it, put this over the top so it provides a little bit of protection. And the top of the engine here is a little higher than the top of the box. And so I wrote a note to myself that says, do not push down, because if I pushed down on it, I'd push down and maybe break. Yeah, he was in a dogfight with an American pilot. Fortunately, neither one of them was hurt. But yeah, he was in a dogfight. So this is model number 122, which is not what it purports to be. Oh, I'm going to check something here. So when I bought this, the person who sold it to me included some aftermarket decals that were more accurate than these. Okay. They didn't include the stripe. The intent was that the stripe would be painted on, which is what I'm going to attempt to do. But these are the, you can see the difference between this and that. The main difference is that these are the sponsors for the 1965 car, and these are the sponsors for the 1964 car. And also, oh, this did include the Enco, the little Enco, but it's located in a different location. And then there's the 82. This goes on the stripe. Once the stripe is painted on, instead of it being included, you can't see what I'm talking about. That's great. I'm going to start over because you couldn't see what I was talking about because I was off camera. What I was saying is I got these aftermarket decals that came with the kit. This person who sold it sent them to me because these are the side decals for the 64 car, and you can see that the advertising, the sponsors are quite different for the 1965 car. And they also included a little Lotus insignia that goes on the nose of the car instead of saying Lotus powered by Ford. So this is the 1965 Lotus-Ford, and this is the 1964 Lotus-Ford. So I'm not going to use because it's inaccurate. And I'm going to be painting the yellow stripe on instead of using a decal. And I'm going to be painting over all of the chrome because nothing in the model was actually chromed. Yeah. And I put all the pieces in here because the box didn't open as boxes usually do from the top. It opened from the side and it all spilled out. So let me read this to you because just like with the Apollo, I don't know if you recall, if anybody watched me building the Apollo thing, I read the insert that came with it, and the writing in the 1960s was exaggerated in many ways. Okay, a racing car is described as a vehicle capable of great speed, yet every racing driver knows it is more than that. But it is true. Instead, you have to be able to turn it, for example, and slow it down with brakes. The Lotus-Ford Indy car in the skillful hands of a Jimmy Clark. Oh, Jimmy Clark. Okay. He was Jim Clark, but here he's Jimmy Clark, becomes an inspiration. Until the Lotus-Ford Indy car, racing cars were heavy monsters with four-banger. Or, that was a way you talked about the number of cylinders. Four bangers because there were four cylinders that banged. Offenhauser engines up front with cumbersome tails. I mean, not really cumbersome tails. Filled with nitro alcohol fuel. They had 2-speed transmissions, which was true. There was just a starting gear and a racing gear, because I'll talk about that later, but the engines did not rev very high. They were fairly slow turning engines, relatively speaking. They had solid front and rear axles on big, narrow wheels mounted on skinny tires. That's also true. And the solid axles were, which means that each of the wheels was not suspended individually for absorbing irregularities in the track. They were solid axles. So like if one side went up, the other one went down. And so they were really quite hard to control. Really, they wrote this. They were as fast as stink down the straights, but they didn't like to turn. As fast as stink. See, this is the kind of writing we got in the 1960s. Nobody writes like that anymore. No one says they were as fast as stink down the straights. The brave drivers were forced to sit bolt upright. They weren't forced to sit bolt upright. It's just how the cars were designed. And that's another thing that was kind of interesting about the Offie cars, is that you did sit straight up. And throw the cars into long controlled slides by sawing and heaving. You might wonder, what does that mean? Well, it's not exactly true. Okay, they didn't exactly slide through the corners. That makes it sound like they were doing drifting. They really didn't slide through the corners. But it is true that when they went through the turns, they were all left turns, and so the force went out to the right side, that sometimes the left front tire was actually off the track when they were making turns. That the sideways forces from the speed of the turn and the heaviness of the car would lift the left front tire up. That was kind of interesting. That is not true. All too often, these sliding turns would end in a crunching, scraping collision with the infamous wall. Only the strength of these men, the heft of the cars, and the speed of the fire brigade accounted for less fatalities than one would have believed possible. That's kind of an exaggeration. It was extremely dangerous. Okay. But because of the way the cars were built, people went very much out of their way to not crash. Crashes were really pretty rare. When they did happen, they were very serious. But another thing to talk about when I do retrospectives on old racing is that the cars, cars now are designed to fly apart if there's a collision, race cars. Okay. Back then, they didn't. They were solidly built and pieces didn't fly off. But in Europe, the situation was different. The development of racing cars had progressed toward better handling rather than increased speed. One of the leaders of the new breed of racing engineers in Britain and Europe was John Cooper. It is true, in Formula One racing, there's a lot of turns. It's not ovals. They went on road courses. So there are right turns and left turns, sometimes sharp turns. And so lap times could be reduced not by top-end speed, because there weren't always really long straightaways where that mattered, but how fast you could get through the turns. Okay. And so there was a real premium on being able to go fast, slow the car down very quickly, because you had to slow down to go through a turn. Yes, exactly. Defensive. And there was back in the day, because these cars were so dangerous. I mean, an accident, and any kind of accident could be fatal. They just didn't crash like they do nowadays because they're so much safer. So his revolutionary Formula One had garnered a world's championship for Jack Brabham in 1959 and 60, and much to the amazement of the Indy crowd, in 1960, Cooper brought a 2.8-liter Formula One mid-engineered rear-engine car and finished 8th. The unbelievable speed and maneuverability of the little car while taking the corners at the Brickyard had the crowd hypnotized. That is not true. Nobody in the crowd was hypnotized. It just wasn't. But it was kind of surprising that the car was competitive at all, because it had a much smaller engine, okay, than the Offenhauser Roadsters. Obviously, big changes were coming. It wasn't until 1963 that Jimmy Clark, Scottish world's champion, he wasn't the Scottish world's champion. He was Scottish. He was the world's champion, but he happened to be Scottish. He finished second in 1963. The car driven by Clark was a mid-engine Lotus, built by Colin Chapman, and the car was powered by a Ford V8! Exclamation point. By 1965, a revolution had come to Indy. Mid-engine cars were no longer a novelty. They were here to stay. The 65's Memorial Day Classic told the tale as the first 4 cars came in with mid-engine power. That's true. They started building other kinds of mid-engine, or actually rear-engine cars back then. It wasn't just this particular one. The winner was Jimmy Clark in his British racing green Lotus-Ford. In second place in another Lotus was Parnelli Jones, and third spot Mario Andretti, and L. Miller was fourth. The Offie era at Indy had ended, and Ford was king once again. This is a promo for Ford as much as anything else. So here's kind of a fuzzy picture of them coming across. That's another Lotus back there, and then there's somebody else had built one. So I'd kind of forgotten that by 1965 there were multiple rear engine or mid engine cars in the race, not just this one. Paint the engine block blue. Okay. So I'm not. They talk about painting these parts before you assemble them, but that's just a really bad idea, because then the seams show, and when the seams show, it looks yucky. And all of these parts are chromed. Seriously, the engine block is chromed, and it's supposed to be painted. So yeah, all these parts need to be primed so that paint will actually adhere to it. Which it won't adhere to the chrome. These are Searching ramp 2. Maybe we can find some of these parts on here. They did make, okay. I was thinking that these were missing, but the air scoops do go over the injection tubes. I thought I'd have to fabricate those. But not. Okay, I'm going to start. Just, the engine, it gets installed later. It just goes in the into the chassis later on. These instructions are really not good. They're really pretty crappy. But at least the follow instructions are really difficult. The Savoia, despite the fact that they were done in Japanese, were pretty straightforward. Here's this. I'm going to. Okay, this. I'm going to need another box for parts. Right back. Open the box. Yep. I had a tiny little box that would be just right for the pieces I was working on. It's the one that Porco Rosso was in. There it is. Oh, right where I left it. Okay, this box. This box is going to be they are detached from the tree, and now they're just sort of flopping around, and I don't want to lose them. It's going to be that kind of box. All right, we need open the envelope. Take some parts. There we go. Taking some parts. It's so shiny. Whoa, look at that. Like, whoa. You can hardly focus on them. It's really hard to focus on these parts because they are so shiny. Here, this is kind of, okay, look at this. So this was clearly dipped into a chroming solution. And this is where it was held. You can see there's clamp marks here. You can see this part isn't chromed. This is kind of fun looking at how this was done. It's on the other part as well. Is that this was a clamp on and is dipped into the chroming solution and comes back out. And I would expect that it actually is that there might be some drips and things on it. No, I can't say that for sure, but it might be. I do not understand why there is all of this chrome. Really don't understand that. But it is. I wonder what Tester's quadruple one blue is. There's paint the engine block 1111. Oh. Okay. They really expect you to do this. the tires are embossed with Firestone, which they should be, and then they say paint Firestone flat white. Like I'll have to see how highly embossed that is. That would be next to impossible. The outer wheel. That's pretty funny. Mix flat black with silver to the wheel. That's actually true. The wheels themselves were kind of a dark color, a dark metallic, and then the rim and the spinner were lighter. Fortunately, I don't have to mix flat black with silver to get the correct color. I've got many different shades of metallic. Okay, the front and the rear tires are different sizes. Oh, the bulkheads are, these are bulkheads. They're chromed. Whoa, that is not how they really were. Okay, I'm going to find the parts. These, at least, are fairly straightforward. Engine blocks. And once again, I'm using the saw here to keep from putting divots into the pieces themselves. And I'll file the sprue that's still attached. Once these are put together, I'll file them down. They'll be filed and sanded so the seams don't show. I am appalled at how much chrome there is on this model. It makes it really hard to focus on it with the shininess. Do not know what they were thinking when they did this. So those are these two parts. Okay. Now I need the transmission rear cover and the front cover. These are those. Oh, this is pretty funny. I'll have to show it to you in a bit. The cam drive. I'm using the saw again so that I don't break it off and create a divot in the plastic, which can happen. The sprue can break off inside the part instead of outside the part. And then there's a gap that has to be filled in. And this part is attached in a place where I can't get the saw blade. Yeah. And then this looks like the front. Yeah, they didn't number the parts. It's supposed to be able to identify them by the way they look. I guess that's possible. And the chrome all needs to be scraped away from any place where it's adhering. But look at all the detail that is imprinted in this. If it wasn't chrome plated, it would actually be pretty cool. Once it is primed, I'll be able to see what's going on a little bit better. Okay. The heads. I don't see any parts that look like those. It must be these. Yeah, those. There they are. Oh, there's a notch. Yeah, there's the notches of which they speak. Well, this day is not moving on at all. It's only 11:30. I'm not even halfway through. Yeah, the absolutely coolest thing is the chrome-plated driver. Somebody. Okay. Well, the parts are off. Them in the box here so I don't lose them. These back in this box. Well, I could do the wheels too. If I'm going to be priming these, let me go ahead and get the wheels done. So whatever that. Oh, that's a front radiator. That's cool. This goes into the front of the car. It's a screen to keep the dirt out of the air intake. And this wheel fell off, broke off. Spinners are they're supposed to be larger in the back and smaller in the front. They're not. They're the same size. I'm not sure what to make of that. It's interesting that they chrome plated all of this and then gave painting instructions, including for the wheels. And the painting instructions are actually more or less accurate in terms of the colors that are supposed to be painted. Even though the wheels aren't accurate, they're from the wrong car. But then, as I said, this whole model is the wrong year. This says the larger inner wheels with the larger rear tires. There's an F stamped inside the wheel for the front and an R stamped inside the wheel for the rear, but they are all the same. See if I can see any stamp at all. No. I hope the openings on the wheels are all the same. Yeah, I mean the tires are different, but the wheels are not different. And then there's the Firestone embossed And on the 1965 car, oh, hi, Ole. Thanks for dropping in. I am building a totally inaccurate representation of the 1965 Lotus-Ford, the Lotus-Ford that won the 1965 Indianapolis 500. And this is a 1976, I think, reissue of the original model kit that was put out in like 1966 or 67 after Jim Clark won the Indy 500 in a rear-engine car. This is, a famous Ford. It's actually in a Ford museum in Dearborn. I've seen this car in person. Not this car. I've seen the real car. This is a model of the 1964 car that was rebadged to look like the 1965 car. It just really is. Even the instructions show the 1964 car. But it's like the one I built when I was a kid. It's just a reissue. Everything is chromed. Look at this. I mean, just all the parts are absolutely totally chromed, which makes it quite difficult to work with because of the plating. Is in the way. It's hard to see because of the glare, actually. But yeah, I'm going to be building this, and just all of these parts are going to get primed and painted in more appropriate shades of metallic using the Viejo metallics that I've got. Yeah, they actually do provide painting instructions, which you're supposed to do, paint over the chrome. I'm not really sure how they expected to do that. They don't talk about sanding it down or priming it, but there it is. So I'm taking apart the parts for the first two bits, and I'm going to prep them and then prime them, and then eventually paint them. All of the parts except the tires. Let's see. The tires are black, and they're kind of squishy even. They have bumps on them. And there's just weird lumps. Oh, good. Yeah, they put the windshield in. Or there are two. There's two windshields. Great. In with the rubber tires. And the body of the car is molded in what they think is British racing green. Although when I bought this kit 1 billion years ago, yeah, the bodywork is green. I do have British racing green paint that I'm going to use once it's assembled, and I'll paint it. And then it's got this yellow stripe. It's got the yellow stripe on it, and I'm going to paint the yellow stripe as opposed to using the yellow stripe decal, which is inauthentic. The yellow stripe decal is made for the 64 car. But it's kind of interesting. You can see where this was held. It's like this green spot here, as these were molded in green. And you can see where it was held by some sort of mechanical thing and dipped down into the chrome. What I'm really surprised at is that there aren't any chrome drips on the bottoms of these parts. I would expect that the solution that they used would have actually like formed some drips. Maybe there are. I might see those later. I don't know. The British racing green is really dark. I think on screen it looks kind of black. The British racing green paint is actually very dark as well. I don't know. This camera doesn't show colors accurately. Like the Savoia S21 kept appearing to be orange instead of bright red like it really was. But yeah, that's it. So this is, I don't know how far I'm going to get today. What I'm hoping to do is get some of these parts prepped. Taking the sprue off at least, and then I'm going to prime them all. I hope the primer adheres to the chrome okay, and then I'll paint them. At the pace I go, this will take a long time. I'm sure when I built this kit back in like 66 or 67, I would have been like 14 or 15 maybe. I didn't paint it at all, so I probably built this in the span of a weekend. If I'm lucky, I'll finish this by the end of the calendar year. The model is it's really weird. It's not only the wrong car, but it isn't even described accurately in the instructions. Like the wheels for the rear are supposed to be bigger than the wheels for the front. The tires are, but yep. Have a good dinner, and thanks for dropping in. I really appreciate it when you just even drop in and say hi. And I'm really glad that you got a new job that is treating you well. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That it would dip, and that there'd be it would come through like a hand dryer almost kind of thing. That it would spray off any excess. It's not totally even. There are. I mean, I can look at this and I can see that there are little spots where the chrome isn't even. I'll probably sand that down as much as I can on these parts when it comes time to do that. There, I got a bunch of parts done. Sanding these is going to be a little bit of a challenge because it's so hard to see. So I'm going to have to go by feel. So I'm going to I haven't had this out in a while. It's time to get the needle files and the sandpaper out. I'm going to focus on the wheels first. Those should be the easiest to do. Focus on getting the wheels done. And then the engine parts. So these bits, it's a matter of just finding the sprue, where it's the excess plastic around the edges and making sure I get that off. The other thing, I discovered this when parts are chromed like this and you're supposed to put them together, the cement dissolves the chrome and the $400. What was I saying? Yeah, the cement dissolves the chrome, and where the sprue was, yeah, I will be damaging the chrome through sanding, but the chrome isn't going to show. The chrome is going to be painted over. So building a model with chrome on it, just frequently you just end up with with flaws. Yeah, I can't really see what's going on here. So I have to do this by feel. And I'm not sure, what is that? Is that where the, looks like right there, there's a flaw in the chrome right there. I thought maybe that was supposed to represent the filler, the air filler. But it looks like it's just a flaw in the chrome because the others don't have it. I need to try to sand that down. So pretty much all of this chrome is going to disappear under paint. The none of the car, the original car, was chromed. It was all maybe like polished aluminum, polished steel. And so I'm going to be using various shades of the metallics that I've got. Try to make it look as much like it should as I can. It's interesting. It's not just where the sprue was, but there are bits, unevenness in the edges of the chrome anyway. I don't know if they use real chrome for this. I don't know. Probably all sorts of toxic heavy metals here. So the real car, the inside of the wheel is a darker color than the very rim, than the very edge of the rim. And I'll be attempting to do that. In fact, the painting instructions recognize that. And they said, in order to make your silver paint darker, mix it with black paint. I don't have to do that because I have different shades of metallic that you've already seen. Fingernail around the edge here and see if I've got it. At some point in the future, I'm going to be talking about race cars in the 1960s and 70s. I read the instructions in very flowery language. It talked about, heavy monsters that were fast as spit down. I mean, just bizarre language, the way they wrote it. In fact, all the Offenhauser cars were not really that fast, and they really weren't that hard to turn. They were pretty heavy. They were pretty front nose heavy. And they didn't slide through turns except on dirt tracks where they were designed to slide. But on asphalt tracks, they really didn't. They didn't drift through the turns. But as I'd mentioned earlier, the left front wheel, as speeds increased, the left front wheel actually did lift off of the. That's what I'm feeling. Side here. Go back and test this one. The left front wheel actually did lift off of the ground. They're driving on three wheels around the turns. How's this going to go? Let's say it goes like that. The inside, that's the outside. Okay. But the cars were. It was interesting to watch the development of the Offenhauser engine. If you're interested in old racing, the Offenhauser engine, which dominated open wheel racing for decades, was unique because of the sustained high speeds. At the time, we wouldn't consider them to be high speeds anymore on a racetrack because they've gone up by about 50% or more since then. But for like a 500-mile race, it was really important that the engine not blow up. And one of the most vulnerable parts of an engine was the header. It's the cover that goes over the top of the engine, covering up the cylinders and the that's where it broke off of the sprue. And there's a little indentation there. I don't think it's going to show. I can feel it. It's a tiny little notch there. So it's a vulnerable part because the pistons and valves and everything are under the header, the cover, and the it's bolted on with a back then a rubber seal, and the materials weren't all that great. Okay, so the seal would deteriorate fairly quickly over time, especially because of the engine's running hot. It's got lubricants all over the place, that oil and gasoline and combustion components that can dissolve the seal. And so the issue was that the header, the cover, would fail. And if that failed, then the engine would just blow up. And not like an explosion. Well, actually a little bit like an explosion, but parts would break. It's like a piston rod would break, or valves would break, and then the oil would start to burn, and the fuel would leak, and there'd be this huge puff. If an engine failed, a huge puff of white smoke, white being from the oil burning. Used to see that a lot in stock car racing, where they had a more a traditional engine with headers. But the thing about the Offenhauser engine is that it didn't have a header in that sense, because it was a solid block of metal. Right? There's no bolted down component with a seal, and that's what really made the engine what it was. Is that it didn't have a head gasket or a header that was bolted on, so the gasket couldn't fail, and the head couldn't fail because it didn't have one. It was just solid metal, and then the engine was built from the inside of the engine block instead of, from the bottom instead of kind of from the top. And that made those engines reliable. They were 4 cylinders, which sounds kind of weird. I mean, nowadays, all racing engines are 8 or 12. But these were 4-cylinder engines, and the cylinders were massive. They were huge in terms of their displacement. That is, the volume of them. They were like the little toy buckets plastic buckets you play with at the beach. And they were really, really big. And the engines didn't turn very fast. It wasn't like now Formula One engines will run at 20,000 RPM, and NASCAR engines will run at 9. These things were slow, relatively huge cylinders, slow turning, very high torque. Okay, very high torque engines. That's why they could use 2-speed transmissions. One to get it started, like a starting gear to get it going from rolling, standing stop, right? Had to get it started, and then once it was rolling, it'd shift into second gear or racing gear, and that would be it. And because it was so slow turning, it had fairly broad RPM range, relatively speaking. So they weren't like massively, the acceleration wasn't real massive. It wasn't like the fastest acceleration in the world, but once they got going, the engines were really reliable. And they would last, some of them would last for 500 miles in the Indy 500, which in many cases was a war of attrition more than anything. So they were unique, built just for the purpose of racing without braking. And, they lasted the whole season. You didn't have a different engine for every race. You might open it up and, check to make sure that the valves were all seated and clean out the residue and things like that. But for the most part, you would run the same engine all the time. But that was the unique thing about the Offenhauser, was that you didn't have to worry about the head gasket failing because there wasn't a head gasket. And that made it a really good racing engine. When they went to the Fords, the V8s, and then later on other manufacturers came in as well, those engines were prone to failure if they were just more conventionally built. But when they talked about the big, heavy Offenhauser engines and being a 4-banger, that's what they meant, is that it was a 4-cylinder engine. That was designed to withstand the rigors of racing. Because it was slow, because the cylinders were so big, and it was so slow turning. It had a very low frequency exhaust. It rumbled. Engines now, if you go to an open wheel racing event or just listen to it on TV, they whine. They have these very, very high pitched, almost, it's really pretty annoying, the frequency. But these just rumbled. It was a very unique low frequency exhaust sound. And that was the auditory feature of the Hauser engines. And when they're in the early 60s, when you would have a mix of Offenhauser engines and the rear engine Fords, the difference in the sound, you didn't even have to see what was happening on the track. You just listened and you knew which kind of car was passing by, because the V8 engines had a way higher frequency sound. When we heard it for the first time in the early 60s, when they came to Milwaukee and raced there, it was like, whoa, what is that and why? Because it didn't sound anything like the race engines we were used to hearing. The Offies that we were used to hearing. So that was another unique part of it at the time. To stand all around the rim, because the chrome, not just where the sprue was, but the chrome itself is sort of uneven. I had trouble holding on to the parts. Just an issue with the back of it that has to fit flush into the wheel, the tire. So the other thing about, when I was reading the instruction sheet and it described all racing, it talked about the drivers were forced to sit bolt upright. Well, that's not true. They weren't forced to do that. It's just how the cars were built. And people, they were used to sitting in real regular cars, and everybody sat upright. When the mid-engine cars, the rear engine cars came out, there was they were much lower cars. And they were shorter. They didn't come up off the ground as high, just because of the way the engine, the Offie engine was built and all of that. But they started to get into the drivers reclining. They're almost laying on their backs. At some point, they actually ended up like that, being. Oh, okay, that's interesting. See, the inside is an issue as well. It was just excess chrome there. But it was a feature of those cars that the seats were very upright, which gave the drivers better visibility. And I think they just found it more comfortable. So it wasn't that they were forced to sit that way. It's just that's how the cars were built. And, that's just the way it was. Cars were built that way. So that's how you sat. And then it became kind of weird initially, and how much the drivers are kind of just laying down, and now they're practically like a recliner. Drivers are laying on their backs, not in stock cars. In stock cars, it's closed wheel racing. It's very different. They're the driver. So in open wheel racing now, the drivers are reclining practically on their back, and their arms are totally outstretched to reach the steering wheel. If you were watching a stock car race, it's pretty much just the opposite. The drivers are sitting very much upright and right on top of the steering wheel, very, very close. They're not. Their arms are like this. It's a totally different posture in terms of the way they fit into the vehicle. But that's getting into different kinds of racing. I was going to talk about the Offenhauser engine. So the Offenhauser engine was developed so that it didn't blow up, which was a good thing, because a race car goes it goes pretty slow when the engine's blown up. Like it doesn't. There's no engine, so it doesn't work, right? So the Offenhauser engine was developed to be reliable. And it had several features to do that. One is that it didn't have a header and a head gasket that could fail. It turned slowly. Okay. So it had low RPMs, and that helps an engine last longer. And it was really quite large and heavy. When it first came out, all through the 40s and early 50s, the engine was installed upright. One would expect that, right? It makes sense that you look at an engine, you can tell what the top is. That's the cylinders go up and down vertically in that orientation. I'm going to talk about an innovation. It was an interesting innovation in racing. So there are a couple of things. The engine was the heaviest part of the vehicle. Okay, and so on a straightaway, that didn't much matter where the engine was or how it was located. In a turn, it mattered quite a lot, because the faster you go through a turn, the weight shifts toward the outside of the turn. If you're turning left all the time, the weight is always moving toward the right. And race car designers did a couple of things to deal with that. One is that the suspension on the right-hand side of the car was longer than it was on the left-hand side. That is to say that the wheel was further away from the body on the right-hand side than it was on the left-hand side. So that when the weight shifted toward the right, there was more suspension there to keep it in check and to keep the wheels on the ground. But the could also do some things with the engine, because the engine was a big, heavy thing, and going through the turn, it wanted to flop over to the right. So one of the first things they did, besides messing with the suspension, to make it asymmetric, to get through the turns better, is that the engine, it was still bolt upright. It was like the top was the top, but it didn't have to be in the center of the car. the engine could be moved a little bit to the side. And so that would move the engine over to the left a little bit, and it would keep the weight on the left side of the car. So when it went through the turn, it would help keep it stable. So that was a pretty important innovation. I have to take a little bit of a break soon. Coffee is working its way through the system, so to speak. Have I got an hour left? Yeah. So be able to get these done. I might be able to get these cleaned up as well, and then I'll be able to prime all of it. Two halves of the engine block need to be cemented together. Okay, you can see here. Here's an example of excess chrome. If you look inside the wheel, see it here. There's some of the chrome plating that dripped down. But the Offenhauser engine was pretty amazing. It was it was like in almost every respect the opposite of the racing engines now, or even the V8s, the Ford V8s that became popular in the mid to late 60s. It had 4 cylinders, not 8. The cylinders were huge. The cylinders on the V8s were quite small in terms of volume. I'm talking about in terms of volume now. Basically how big the pistons were. So when I say the cylinders were big, it meant they had very, very big pistons that moved inside of a very large opening in the engine. It was low revving. It turned, probably 5,000 or 6,000 RPM, not 10 or 11. The fuel was different too. The thing I read at the beginning talked about an awkward tail filled with nitrous alcohol. The cars ran on methanol, which was a kind of alcohol. They were not gasoline powered; they were alcohol powered. In some ways, it was safer than gasoline, as we found out in a horrible accident at Indy 500 a few years after that. The Fords, they were V8 engines. They ran on not regular, super premium gasoline. thing about it is that the alcohol, when it burned, you couldn't really see the flames. Okay, they were really very light. The color, I guess, of the flames, you see, they were just really light blue. And so if there was a fuel spill, okay, and there sometimes were, and there was a fire, and it got like on a crew member or even the driver, it was really hard to see that there was a fire. I mean, because the flames weren't very visible, so you couldn't really see that there was a fire. So, people had to be pretty vigilant with the fuel, the flames that could come from it. They got to wash these before I put them on, before I prime them. But yeah, it was methanol. The other thing about these engines is the cars didn't have starters in them. Okay, cars now have like your car there's a little electric motor that turns the engine, makes the engine turn so that it'll start running. The engine needs to be kind of turning before the ignition and everything will work. So these cars, and even the V8s later on, didn't have starter motors in them because it added to the weight. You had the weight of the electric motor to get started, and you had to have the weight of the battery, that would turn the starter motor. And they didn't want all of that, so the starting motors for these cars were external. They were carts with a battery and an electric motor in it, and they had these huge, long, probably like 3 feet long probes, and the cart would come out, and the probe would stick into the into the engine block itself, and it would turn the engine, get it started. Start your engines. The driver didn't start the engine. The starting crew, with all their carts, would be out on the track, plugging the probe into the engine and then getting it going that way. It's always kind of interesting to watch that. Sometimes it didn't work. It just didn't start. That was a disappointment. So these cars are fairly aerodynamic, and whale shaped kind of. And they did have a big tail on the back, basically is where the fuel tank was, because there wasn't any room in the front for the fuel. The fuel tank went in the front, in the back. In the front engine cars, the fuel tank was, I think, in the front. In the rear engine cars, I mean, it was along the sides. The fuel tanks were along the sides. Oh yeah, that's another thing that really made some of these cars really very scary. Is with rear engine cars, the fuel tanks would be alongside the driver. Right? So I remember hearing that with some of these cars, that the driver was basically sitting in a bathtub of gasoline, which turned out to be a really bad idea until they developed reliable fuel cells that didn't rupture. Otherwise, if there was an accident, the fuel tank would just break open and all this fuel would come spilling out, which was not a good thing. Definitely not a good thing to have happen. And it was a few years later, I believe it was in 1968, where there was, when that did happen, that there was a crash right at the start-finish line after the first lap. And it was a massive conflagration of orange flames and black smoke. Gasoline fire, not an alcohol fire. But yeah, the Offenhauser engines were, and I still miss it. The rumbling sound. They just made this growling noise. And then when the drivers lifted into the turns and go boom, 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 because of a little misfiring in the cylinders, as opposed to the high frequency whine like a Formula One car. Now they rev like 18, 20,000 RPM. The first year those came out, the whining noise was unbearable, just really, really unpleasant. I mean, just hurt your ears, unpleasant. It was a huge fire hazard. Yeah. During that crash, 2 drivers were actually killed because of the fire. They couldn't get out of it. They were trapped in it. It was just a horrible, horrible thing. I'll talk about that more as I talk about old racing stuff. But that incident gave rise to interesting safety features. I need to take a quick break. I'm not going to bother with the break screen. I'll be back in under 3 minutes. You can start counting. Okay. So these wheels will go together like this, and I'm going to be painting them. The these surfaces will need to be sanded down so that they adhere to each other. That's going to be inside the tire. But since I'm priming them, looks like I need to prime them front and back. Yeah, I'll do that before I cement them on here. At least that's on the inside, so it's not going to show very much. But there, of course, are those hideous little circle things that I keep talking about all the time. Okay. Do this. See what's up with this. Screw there, screw there, screw there. Flaws in the chrome. I'm going to do these two sides, and then I'm actually going to join them together. I'm going to cement them together because they need to be cemented before they're painted, so that I can get rid of the seam. You've seen that in other bits that I've built, right, where parts come together, and then the seam shows, and then it needs to be filled in before it's painted. Same thing is going to be true with this, is that the two halves of the engine block will need to be joined together and then primed after the seam is taken care of. So I've been talking about the Offenhauser engine and how different it was from the 8-cylinder V8s that were put in these cars later. The fuel was different. The racing was really just an incredibly dangerous thing. I'm going to mainly be talking about U.S. racing. That wasn't good. That should not have broken there. That won't be a problem. So throughout the 40s and 50s, as the Offenhauser open wheel racing series really got going, USAC, United States Auto Club, okay, they were the sanctioning body of all of that. In the races that my dad grew up with and then we grew up with, safety features. Let me talk about safety. Okay. For one thing, among other things, there was throughout the 40s and 50s a resistance to seatbelts. Okay. You're running these open wheel racers and you're in this cockpit, and I don't know if you've ever seen them, but you're sitting upright and there's no door. Okay. There's nothing on the sides holding you in. In fact, there's a pretty significant cutout in the side of the racer. And there was actually a reluctance among drivers, because it wasn't manly, to wear seatbelts. So you're in this exposed cockpit, racing along at the time were fairly high speeds. I mean, they were pretty, at the time, pretty fast. And again, it wasn't about necessarily raw speed. It was just being faster around the track than the other people who were racing. That was the real thing. That was the important thing. But didn't even want to wear seatbelts. There were helmets. People did wear helmets. But I'm going to go back to the seatbelt thing. When seatbelts did start being used, they were just lap belts. I don't know if cars that people drove were kind of the same thing. Seatbelts weren't a thing. they were an unusual option until the 1960s, really. And then they were just lap belts. There weren't any shoulder belts. They just weren't. So the same thing was true of these race cars. As you were sitting there kind of exposed in the cockpit, maybe you wore a lap belt. There were no 5-point harnesses holding you in. So if you got into a crash, being ejected from the race car was, that was something that happened. It just did. It was kind of the hazard of it. But then, people, they just started wearing lap belts at least. There weren't any of these Nomex fire suits. Those didn't come till later. It was not unusual, especially during the summer, when things were pretty warm. It was not unusual for the drivers to just wear a T-shirt. Because, it was hot. So that was, that's not much protection. And just wore pants and a T-shirt, got in the car and did racing. That's how that went. Kind of amazing now to think about it, but that's how it is. That is how the racing worked. And they I did. See this? I have destroyed $85 worth of collector value. Yeah. What can I say? It's ruined now. And now I'm dealing with just ridiculously aggressive 1960s chrome plating. Actually, this is a 70s remake, but still. Yeah, so drivers, usually they would just wear a T-shirt. Depending on the weather, sometimes they wore a long sleeve shirt, but it was still just a shirt. Not a, just, we can't imagine the lack of safety features that existed back then. Seriously, you just really can't imagine that was how racing really happened. So they did have helmets. All of the helmets, they were just open face helmets. Okay. They weren't these like totally head enclosure kinds of things. Now they're open faced helmets and goggles. The goggles were really important because the race cars, there's just a lot of stuff in the air. Okay, the tires wore out, and so there were rubber particles flying all over the place in the air. The exhaust was dirty. The engines leaked oil, so there was oil spray going on all over the place. And if you look at like old newsreels of the ends of the races, the winner of the race would be sitting there getting all congratulated and everything. You would notice that their face was totally covered in oil. It was totally black because they'd wear the helmet. Okay, there was that, and the goggles, but usually the rest of their face was uncovered. Just not covered. And so the rubber, the grime, the bits of asphalt pavement that would break up, the oil, smoke, the exhaust, all of that would just cover their face. And so you would see these people getting congratulated, winning and all. And their whole face, except for around their eyes, or the goggles, where the whole rest of their face would just be black from all this stuff. Oh, yeah. No head restraints, nothing like that. If there was a collision, all of the force of the collision was transferred to the driver. As I was saying before, cars now, if you see an accident happen with open wheel racers, you'll see parts flying all over the place. The wheels break off for sure, and suspension parts. Sometimes even the whole engine housing, the part that holds the engine and the transmission, that will break off. And they're designed that way. The idea is that those parts will carry away the energy of the collision. If they go flying, then that amount of energy, since there's only a fixed amount of energy in that kind of situation, is carried off and not transmitted to the driver. And that's how that works. That's the intent. Then these cars were built so that parts didn't break off. And so if there was an accident, if the driver stayed in the vehicle at all, yeah, there you go. Yeah, if they stayed in the vehicle at all, the force of the collision was just transferred to them. And so what we, kind of in an interesting way, there were many fewer accidents than there are now, because having a crash in one of those cars, your chances of being killed were extremely high. I mean, it was a matter of life and death in these vehicles. And so, especially open wheel vehicles, if open wheel touch each other, it'll just transfer the rotational energy of the wheels turning into each other. You can actually get catapulted, just thrown. The whole car could be thrown because of that. It's so it wasn't unusual to have several people die each year through these accidents, but there were fewer accidents when the cars became safer, in that the protection for the driver became better and better. You watch these things at incredibly high speeds, parts flying all over the place, drivers walking away, dazed because they just got, into an 80G deceleration kind of situation. They'd be dazed, but not dead. So in some ways, it's kind of ironic that the safer the cars became, the less safe the cars became. In that accidents became more common. Okay. What a tiny print. Uh-huh. Hey, Enforcer. Thanks for joining in. What trading cards do you have? Taking the chrome plating off the two parts where they fit together so that I can use plastic model cement on them. Let's see how they fit. I'm going to guess that these don't fit very well. And they really just don't terribly well. Oh, Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Okay. Really, they didn't sell Yu-Gi-Oh cards? Huh. I know Magic the Gathering is just like the huge card game now. It's massive. You get professionals, people who make a living doing Magic the Gathering. A friend of ours, actually one of the people who was one of the original members of Dice and Dungeons, was a Magic the Gathering judge. He had to go to judge school and pass exams and things so that he could officiate at Magic the Gathering tournaments. I thought that was kind of fascinating. Didn't even know such a thing existed, but it did. I'm going to put these together now. Be able to do some priming between now and Friday of the wheels at least, and maybe some of these other pieces if I can get them done. But I want to get these attached to each other. I want them to be cemented together so that I can get the seam cleaned up, and then I can prime them and finish them that way. I have to clean off the chrome plating because the plastic cement doesn't adhere to the plating. This whole model would have been better if they didn't plate it, but it also would have been better if they had the right car. So they don't know how much they might be worth. You made a white deck? Oh wow. Okay. I only played Magic the Gathering a couple of times a long, long time ago. I had a green, it was mainly green, I think a little bit of black. It's kind of a weird mix. Nicole played a black and red deck, but then made a blue and white deck. And I remember the blue and white deck as being just really, really hard to battle against. Yeah. And I didn't know what I was doing. So I can empathize with you in that I really didn't know what I was doing with the Magic cards either. I was never good at it. Just never got to be good at it. So this isn't the same as the stuff I grew up with. Okay. This is almost like it isn't just a welding kind of cement. It's almost like a contact cement, but it does dissolve the plastic some, and the plastic has to be clean. It's supposed to be applied to both surfaces. I just got it all over the outside. I'll just have to deal with that later. To get these together and align them. And all sorts of things with a long time. Okay. It could be city. Some of the Yu-Gi-Oh cards are, I guess, if they're the older ones, I don't know much about them. I remember the kids having them. I never played Yu-Gi-Oh. Maybe I can't say I never did. I might have played Yu-Gi-Oh, but I know that there are cards that my kids had them. This might adhere enough that I can prime this. Sometimes you can see how the seams are. See better after it's painted than before. The chrome plating just makes this really hard. Nice flat surface anyway. I can sand that down. Just a little bit out of alignment. One side is just. Things always have enough plastic that it can be sanded off so that the seam becomes invisible. To be as close as possible so that the modification of it is as little as necessary. Okay, I guess that'll have to do. Clean up these bits now. Yeah, magic does, but the magic cards, Yeah, there's so many variations, and then you get these super cards, right? The cards that, if you've got one, you can destroy anybody. I always thought that. I don't know, and then you have people who get really serious, and depending on the deck, there's one or two cards that they absolutely have to have so that they're invulnerable, and then those become highly valuable. I don't know. I don't know much about it anymore, though. I haven't kept up. But yeah, I don't know how else you can find. I don't know how else you can find the value. The a card shop. I don't know. A lot of that at a card shop would depend on their perceived value. Will be what they could get for it if they were to try to sell it. But that might be different. The local market might be different than, say, the international market that you might get on, say, eBay or a dedicated card trading site. You might get. I don't know how you would do that. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the sites for trading cards, especially the older Yu-Gi-Oh cards. But I would think that there are places where you can, send pictures of what you have, or you can look on them and see what they're selling them for, and get some idea of what the value on the broader market might be. See if I can get these cleaned up. And then these are the kinds of things where they're going to be taped down to a piece of cardboard and spray painted with the primer. And they will look very different when they're not shiny. Then I'll probably have to end up painting them more than once in that. Once they are not shiny. Thanks for joining in, Enforcer. I really appreciate it. And Aman, I appreciate you coming on too. Thank you. On Friday, these should be primed, and I will then be able to maybe start painting them. Certainly I can start painting the wheels, depending on how much extra work it's going to take to get them cleaned up after they're primed. I don't know what I'm getting into yet. It seems kind of silly that, the model maker, whoever did these, went through all the trouble of dipping these into toxic metal chroming solution just to have to get the chrome off, to be able to use these. And then I'm looking at this and the chrome is all wrinkled. It's just all wrinkly. Yeah, so I'm spending a fair amount of time undoing what should not have been done to begin with. The expectation is that after I prime these, that I'm going to have to be doing a fair amount of sanding on them again, just to get the surfaces so that they're not terrible. Just excess chrome, kind of overhangs. Not going to waste your time having you watch me tape these down to a piece of cardboard, but I do want to get them cleaned up enough so that I can prime them and see exactly what I'm left to work with when that's done. But I am done with the Savoia and Porco Rosso, and that's good. And now I'm going to see what I can do to make this look like a facsimile, at least, of the Lotus-Ford, even though it's the wrong model. There. Let's do this one too. Yeah, I should have. Maybe if I move this along, I should be able to finish cleaning these up. Yet this stream, I hope anyway. Need to wash them down with some isopropyl alcohol and prime them, and then on Friday take a look and see what I'm left with. Talk more about what they did to make Offenhauser engine cars work, especially in the turns, because they were pretty front heavy initially, and there was no aerodynamic downforce. There was just aerodynamics in the sense of trying to reduce air resistance. There was that. That was an important thing, is to make them as streamlined as possible, so there would be minimal air resistance, but there wasn't any such thing as downforce to keep the car on the track. And as I was saying, I said it a couple of times already. In fact, the left front wheel would come up off the track during turns because of the force pushing all of the weight of the car over to the right side. So in order to reduce air resistance, but also to assist in turning, the car manufacturers, the fabricators, started coming up with really very clever ways of repositioning the engine and just repositioning it so that it helped the car through the turns and minimized air resistance. And I'll try to remember that that's what I want to talk about on Friday as I continue my monologue about racing in the 1950s and 60s. You didn't ask for a flip. That you're not going to get one. Unless maybe that's how I close. So I got all these shiny bits. There's one more. I need to get this one cleaned up. There's the screw there. As I said, after I'm done priming these, I'm probably going to have to be doing more modification to them to get them to fit. But that's for the future. Until I know what these things actually look like without all the glossiness that is so distracting and hard, it makes it hard to see. So do this one too. This one fell off. This goes inside the front of the car. It's the screen. All it is. It isn't really. This isn't a radiator. It is just a screen to keep debris out of the engine. It's not the air intake for the engine. Those are velocity stacks. This is for the oil cooler, I believe. Okay, so all these shiny bits here, hopefully on Friday, they will be kind of a pasty white color from the primer. And then I'll be able to do some painting. I'm going to start with the wheels. I paint the wheels, and I'll get the tires out and see what's up with those. How much work needs to be done to make those work. Okay, so these shiny bits will all get primed, and then I'll be able to start working on those. The other thing I'm going to do is I'll put these pieces in here. Otherwise, they're going to get lost. And I very carefully just tossed them in the box here. But if they're in the box, they're less likely to get lost than if they're just laying around. So I'll get some cardboard out and tape those down and spray paint them with the primer. And then on Friday, we'll continue with the construction of this bit here and these. Apparently, the engine block was painted blue. I don't know. I'm going to look at the images that I have of the actual cars to see if that's the case or not. I was thinking of painting it aluminum. But if it's supposed to be blue, I guess it's supposed to be blue. Okay, I don't know about that. Cover is separate. The lower cowl. Okay, these two parts can go together and be cemented together before they're painted. Like the upper body. I'm trying to decide about painting, the sequence of painting, and how that's going to go. A little premature, but sooner than later. I'm going to wrap up and say thanks everybody for joining in. Be sure to watch our Dungeons and Dragons show. Dice and Dungeons is all about Dungeons and Dragons, you know. Our show is amazing. You need to watch it. You do. Watch it. Watch that show. It's great fun. And then I'm going to, get back to building this. I need to prime these pieces and then maybe do a little more prep work and maybe reprime them. I'm not sure. We'll see how it looks after that's done. I can maybe I might be able to get some assembly going depending on how that all turns out. I need to research a little bit about the color that this is all supposed to be painted. You know, I don't know why it would be blue. I don't know how much these seams are going to show. I'll have to find out and then touch up if necessary. And then I'll be moving on to the rest of the vehicle, slowly but surely. And it'll get done. And then I will move on to something else. So mutter, 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 mutter. Yeah. I'm kind of worn out. So thanks everybody for watching. I will see you on Friday as I continue to do some work on this, see how that goes. I'm going to get my British Racing green paint out and test spot it. It's really old. I mean, like 7 years old, maybe older. I might have bought this model ages ago, even before I retired. It might have been one of the first ones I bought, just because it was, a cool nostalgia kind of thing. But I bought British Racing green spray paint at that time, and I want to see if it's still any good and if the color is okay. I'm a little concerned it'll be too dark. So I need to do that. I need to do some priming, come back, do some painting. Yeah, that's about it. I will see you all on Friday, and we'll be continuing to work on what will no longer be incredibly, stupidly shiny bits of the car. And I'll start painting them to be a more realistic representation of what it's supposed to be. Thanks, everybody. See you then.